Picture this. You wake up in a bed, soaked with your own fluids. The sheets beneath your thighs are stiff with dried pus. The air is putrid, thick with the stench of rotting flesh and feces. The castle walls, once glimmering with tapestries of valour, now echo with nothing but the wheezing gasp of your failing lungs and the soft metallic rattle of a golden crucifix shaking in your palsied hands. Every movement burns. Your leg, grotesquely swollen, festers in its own decay, the ulcer gaping wide enough for servants to see bone. Even the leeches flee your putrid blood. Your once mighty body is a prison now, a collapsing temple of pain and filth. You remember once ruling an empire, casting down queens and elevating favourites, breaking from Rome with the arrogance of a god. But now, stripped of youth, breath, and dignity, you are alone in your royal tomb, muttering half-mad curses at ghosts no one else can see. This is how he died, not with glory, but in agony. And what led to this? What rot set not just in the body, but in the soul? Before you turn away, steel yourself. The horror is only just beginning. Before we journey into these forgotten tales of survival and suffering, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden truths of history, please consider liking this video and hitting that subscribe button for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I find it incredible that we're exploring these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand the final decay of Henry Tudor, we must first understand the dazzling, monstrous rise that made his fall so grotesque. The boy is born on a frosty day in late June, in the year 1509. The room smells of lavender oil and sweat. He is the second son of a conqueror king, Henry VII, who clawed his way to power at Bosworth, winning England with blood and calculation. Henry, the spare not, the heiress given the luxury of youth without pressure. He laughs in Latin, dances in silks, and grows tall and handsome, shielded from the weight of the crown by his older brother Arthur. But fate has its own ambitions. Arthur dies. The boy, still barely a teenager, finds himself suddenly positioned to inherit not only a crown, but a bride. Catherine of Aragon, his brother's widow. She is older, educated, Spanish, devout. He is lustful, proud, and spoiled. Their marriage is political theatre disguised as romance, a union propped up by papal dispensation and whispered doubts. At first, Henry dazzles the world. He is everything a Renaissance prince should be. Poets describe his calves, musicians praise his voice. He hunts until the horses foam, and jousts until the crowd roars. He builds palaces with fountains and tapestries, orders virgins to dance for him in shimmering gauze. He writes music, pens treatises, even dabbles in theology. But beneath the velvet and virtue, something ferments. He begins to grow paranoid. His eyes narrow. His temper flares. He suspects disloyalty in courtiers who yawn too slowly. Whispers from Rome warn of ambition disguised as piety. The longer Catherine fails to produce a son, the more his heart calcifies. The boy who once blushed at courtly love now thunders in frustration. He is no longer content to be second to God. He wants to rewrite Scripture itself. As Henry nears 30, he transforms from golden prince to brooding tyrant. When the Pope denies him an annulment, he breaks from Rome entirely. The Church of England is born, not from spiritual awakening, but from lust and pride. His own need becomes the nation's truth. To annul his marriage, Henry brands Catherine a liar and his daughter Mary a bastard. He lifts Anne Boleyn into queenship with trembling hands, promising her sons and glory. When she too fails him, he has her executed, her head falling into a straw basket with a clean French blade. And so it begins. A system takes shape around his desires. A machine designed not to govern, but to gratify one man's hungers. Wives are cycled like horses, courtiers live or die by the softness of their flattery. The Tower of London fills with scholars and traitors alike, bones stacking beneath its stone walls. Henry eats, swells, drinks, and shouts. His legs begin to ache. He ignores the pus that leaks from a wound that will never heal. The man is becoming the monster. Years pass. He marries Jane Seymour. She dies, giving him the only thing he ever truly wanted, a son, Edward. But even this joy is poisoned. Jane's death begins a spiral. The king is now obese, angry, and alone. When he sees his reflection, he flinches. He tries again with Anne of Cleves, but calls her a Flanders mare, and divorces her within months. Catherine Howard is young, trembling, and doomed from the start. She is beheaded for treason. The blood from the scaffold soaks into Henry's mind, staining everything he touches. As Henry ages into his 50s, the pain grows louder than his power. His body begins to betray him. His courtiers no longer laugh at his jokes unless commanded. The nobles begin to plot his death in silence, smiling as they bow. He begins to see shadows moving in mirrors, enemies whispering in church. Even his closest servants dread being left alone with him. The ulcers stink, the madness deepens. But even as Henry sours and decays, England thrives. The navy grows. The court bustles with art and invention. New churches rise. The people sing hymns that would never have existed without the king's rupture from Rome. It is this grotesque contradiction that defines him. A man capable of birthing a nation and butchering those who shaped it. To understand what came next, we must now examine the system that enabled Henry's transformation, how a kingdom not only tolerated, but empowered his descent into cruelty, decay, and madness. What happened next was not just the fall of a man, but the exposure of an entire nation's soul. But the rot within Henry did not spread in isolation. It was cultivated, fertilized, and harvested by a system that had mutated to serve one man's will. It did not begin with whips or fire. It began with silence. Silence in the corridors of Whitehall. Silence in the velvet-draped rooms of Hampton Court. Silence in the eyes of bishops as they turned pages they no longer believed in, nodding in submission. It is not Henry's hunger alone that built this prison of obedience. It is the entire court, every scribe and servant and lord who learned that survival meant smiling while the axe fell on someone else's neck. You are Thomas More. You believe in law, in conscience, in the delicate bridge between man and God. You once joke with Henry, once trust him. Now he demands you renounce the Pope and swear that his marriage is just. You cannot. So they lock you in the tower. You starve. Your beard grows long. Your faith does not bend. You are executed, your head stuck on a pike on London Bridge, flesh rotting in the summer air, while Henry calls you a traitor. You are Anne Boleyn, once the flame of his obsession. You smell the iron in the wind. The courtiers no longer meet your gaze. Your ladies whisper behind sleeves. Then come the trumped-up charges. Incest with your brother, witchcraft, adultery with men you never even spoke to alone. The trial is a performance. The sentence is sealed before the judge opens his mouth. The scaffold is slick with dew when you kneel. You pray, but the crowd is silent. No one weeps. Your death is a necessity. Henry watches from a window. This is how it works. First, your value is determined. Are you fertile, obedient, useful? Then, your loyalty is tested. Fail, and you are rebranded, not as a person, but as a threat. Then comes the removal. Quiet, official, final. Those who remain adapt. The court becomes a theatre of fear. Men learn to praise the king's gout-ridden legs as if they were sculpted marble. Women bite their tongues when asked to describe his stench. Physicians lie to him about his health, terrified of what might happen if they speak truth. His leg wound oozes, the ulcer weeping foul yellow pus. The smell reaches even the council chamber. But they say nothing. Even the artists lie. Holbein paints him as a warrior, wide-legged and immortal, though by now Henry needs a pulley to be lifted onto his horse. The illusion must be preserved. The mask becomes the truth. Inside Parliament, the system warps law itself into a weapon of flattery. The Act of Supremacy declares him head of the Church of England. Treason laws are rewritten so vaguely that a sigh at the wrong moment becomes a death sentence. Juries are selected for their cowardice. Executions are public, loud, bloody, and frequent. Heads roll like dice. Blood pools in gutters. No one protests. That would be suicide. Children are not spared. Princess Mary, daughter of Catherine, is told she is illegitimate. Her title is stripped. Her jewels are taken. She is forced to serve her infant half-sister, Elizabeth, born of the woman who replaced her mother. She sobs in cold halls, writes letters that are intercepted, and bows to a stepmother who will soon lose her head. Her childhood becomes a crucible of forced obedience. Even the king's fool dares not jest too sharply. The system does not just punish opposition, it feeds on participation. Spies fill every room. Servants are paid to report whispers. Torture chambers swell with prisoners whose names no one will remember. They scream beneath the tower in rooms that smell of rust and vomit. The rack stretches bones until they crack. Iron boots crush shins to pulp. The accused confess to anything, everything. The king signs their death warrants without reading. At court, the food grows more extravagant. Pies stuffed with larks, boars' heads glazed in honey. Henry eats until he gasps. His codpiece is stuffed to appear virile, though his body has long betrayed him. His skin cracks from swelling. Boils erupt behind his knees. His breath smells of infection. Still, the flattery flows. Courtiers begin to mimic his cruelty, sensing that power now lies in brutality. Edward Seymour positions himself as a loyal brother-in-law. Thomas Cromwell engineers the king's whims into iron laws, dissolving monasteries and seizing lands. Churches are stripped, monks hanged, relics burned. England's sacred spaces are turned into palaces of political favour. Gold crosses melt into coins for war. None of this would have lasted without the complicity of those around him. Fear is not enough. They must believe in the myth, or pretend to. Those who serve him most faithfully often suffer most. Cromwell, once the architect of Anne Boleyn's destruction, is himself accused of treason and executed without trial. His head is still warm when Henry expresses regret. But it is too late. Regret is not resurrection. You are not safe because you are loyal. You are safe because you are necessary. And when you are no longer necessary, you are erased. This is not just tyranny. It is bureaucracy, soaked in blood. An empire of forms and signatures, of trumpets and pageants, disguising rot. The system becomes self-sustaining. Henry does not have to demand a death. He only has to sigh. The machinery will do the rest. To see how far this rot went, we must now descend deeper. into the private decay, the whispers behind the curtain, the mental deterioration of a man who believed himself chosen by God and whose power was only matched by his terror of losing it. What followed next was not governance, but delusion, not rule, but ritualized collapse. To grasp the full magnitude of what unfolded behind Henry's throne, we must first examine how the very concept of kingship in Tudor England had become indistinguishable from spiritual sanctity and divine punishment. The court was no longer a council. It was a confessional chamber. The distinction between God and the king blurred, then vanished. Priests were replaced with flatterers. Scripture was rewritten to align with royal impulse. What began as a political reformation hardened into an ideological system where questioning the king's desires was not merely treason, it was blasphemy. By now, the man at the center of this machinery had become a relic of his former self. The once chiseled body, adored in portraits and pageants, had swollen to grotesque proportions. His chest wheezed with every breath. His waist, once trim from jousting and hunting, required over 50 inches of fabric. His ulcer, that festering wound in his left leg, leaked constantly. The bandages, soaked and reeking, had to be changed several times a day. The pain was excruciating and unrelenting. You are the servant assigned to clean the wound. You hold your breath as you peel away layers of cloth, each one darker and wetter than the last. A slick, yellow rot coats the inside of the dressing. When the final layer lifts, the smell hits you like a blow, sour meat and curdled milk. The ulcer is angry, cratered, purple at the edges, and so deep that at its worst you swear you can see into it. The king moans, but does not cry. He no longer has the energy. Once he threatened to execute any physician who dared to suggest amputation. Now they lie to him instead. Henry had become the embodiment of royal fragility, physically monstrous, emotionally erratic, spiritually ravenous. His inner circle adapted by mirroring his madness. Ministers began to anticipate punishments before they were spoken. Lords denounced one another in desperation. Wives walked on knives. Psychologically, Henry was deteriorating into paranoia and narcissism so profound that it redefined the moral structure of the nation. He believed in divine right, yes, but not just as a political doctrine. He believed God had truly chosen him, was speaking through him, suffering through him. Every ache in his body became a heavenly trial. Every betrayal, divine vengeance. He accused those closest to him of treason with no evidence. He ranted to empty rooms. He saw enemies in shadows and insult in silence. The ghost of Anne Boleyn haunted his dreams, her dark eyes glaring as her severed head rolled in his mind. Catherine of Aragon's final curse whispered on her deathbed, "In this world I will be your death," stuck in his ear like a burning coal. Even Jane Seymour, the one he claimed to love most, returned in his feverish hallucinations, not as a mother of peace, but a bloodied spectre blaming him for her agony. But the system had no off switch. It continued to grind, even as its architect crumbled. The psychological impact extended beyond the king. His children, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, grew up in a world where love was transactional and affection a weapon. Their childhoods were filled with executions, annulments, bastardy decrees, and sudden disappearances. Mary watched her mother be cast out of court, die alone, and be declared never married. Elizabeth lost her mother to the scaffold at the age of 2 and was labelled a bastard before she could form sentences. Edward, the long-awaited son, was treated as an idol rather than a child. When he cried, Servants flinched. When he laughed, they praised his genius. None of them could trust anyone. Every gesture of affection was weighed. Every gift, every glance carried consequence. Henry's psychological collapse became their inheritance. Resistance was not bravery, it was suicide. The few who dared to challenge him, like Anne Askew, a Protestant woman who refused to recant her beliefs, were broken on the rack until their joints dislocated. Askew was burned alive in Smithfield, carried to the stake in a chair because she could no longer walk. The fire, they said, rose high, but she never screamed. This was the cost of conscience. Others tried subtler forms of survival. Servants learned to disappear into silence. Courtiers smiled without opinion. Ladies in waiting whispered comfort to queens who would soon face the axe. One woman offered herself to the king in bed out of fear, knowing a refusal could be seen as treason. Each individual constructed their own fortress of coping. Some retreated into faith, others into drink. Still others became instruments of the king's will, learning to find meaning in obedience. None escaped unchanged. Meanwhile, public spectacles of punishment served a secondary function, not just deterrence but catharsis. The people, unable to question their monarch, directed their rage downward. Women accused of adultery were beaten in the streets. Catholics and Protestants alike were executed depending on Henry's mood that season. England itself fractured under the pressure. Faith was no longer an anchor, it was a shifting tide. What was sacred one year was heresy the next. Monasteries were pillaged. The poor, once cared for by monks and nuns, were left to rot. Vagabondage exploded. Starving children lined roadsides. The landscape of England changed forever, not just physically, but spiritually. The contradiction was grotesque. This was the era of Tyndale and Cranmer, of the King James Bible's embryonic roots. It was also the era of boiling alive, of drawing and quartering, of mass surveillance through pulpit and privy. A golden age of culture, fed by a river of blood. Henry himself began to believe his suffering was martyrdom. He spoke of his ulcer as a holy affliction. His syphilitic hallucinations, his rages, his impotence, these, to him, were not punishments, but divine burdens. Chosen pain. He became convinced that the more he suffered, the more justified his cruelty. His final marriage to Catherine Parr offered some measure of intellectual companionship, but even she knew better than to ever disagree in public. She narrowly avoided execution for suspected Protestant leanings, and only survived by pleading, sobbing, and submitting. Her apology was recorded like a treaty. Her lesson, eternal, intelligence was danger. The Tudor court had become a theatre of managed insanity. Applause was mandatory. Exit was death. And yet, it continued to function. What came next was not just the king's decline, but the consequence of having built a nation around the whims of a single, decaying body. Soon, the flesh would fail entirely, and with it, the illusion. What must be understood is that Henry's body was no longer merely a body. It had become a national metaphor, swollen, leaking, wounded, and worshipped. His decay mirrored the kingdom he had reshaped. To question the ulcer was to question the crown. And so, the country watched as its monarch decomposed in public view, pretending all was well. The rituals continued. The pageants were held, processions paraded before the people, their banners bright, the trumpets blaring, though the man inside the palanquin could no longer walk without groaning. The royal robes masked festering sores. Courtiers clapped as his swollen legs wobbled beneath cloth of gold. He was not so much king now as relic, and relics are sacred only when they do not speak. The final years were a study in grotesque preservation. Henry had become so obese that a special mechanical hoist was built to lower him onto his horse. The smell of his wound preceded him by several paces. Servants carried pomanders of clove and rose oil just to endure being near him. When he slept, it was in short, choking bursts, the breath catching in his throat as if even his lungs resisted his will. But the court still bowed, still smiled, still lied. He knew it too. That was the horror of it. He understood that they feared him, not loved him, that his power was absolute, but hollow, that his son Edward, the one pure thing he had ever brought into the world, would inherit not a legacy of strength, but a minefield of enemies. Henry's paranoia deepened. He began rewriting his will obsessively. He no longer trusted his counselors, so he wrote out their roles in dense clauses, sealing them with shaking hands. He had become obsessed with legacy, with the future, with the idea that history might forget him. He would not allow it. In January of the year 1547, the king calls for Parliament, though he cannot walk. He sits on a throne lined with cushions, trembling and yellow-faced, issuing commands with the theatrical cadence of a dying god. The people see not a monarch, but a corpse in waiting. His doublet barely closes. His face is pallid, oily, and tense. His ulcer has ruptured twice in the past month. He knows he is dying, but he cannot bear the idea of diminishing, so he clutches the performance with both hands, and the court claps. The broader political machine, meanwhile, lurches forward, corrupted by years of absolute rule. The nobility is fractured into factions, each calculating how to outmaneuver the others the moment Henry breathes his last. Religious reformers and Catholic loyalists sharpen their knives, not just rhetorically, but literally. The dissolution of the monasteries Henry's most radical acthars scattered thousands into poverty. Former monks beg in the streets. Ancient churches rot. Lands once held by holy orders now line the pockets of opportunistic nobles. England's religious soul has been gutted, sold, and repackaged. Rebellion simmers. The Pilgrimage of Grace, a revolt in the north, had already risen and been crushed years earlier, but its memory burns. The people, starving and scared, begin to whisper again. Not of God's will, but of justice. The system has held for decades, but now it begins to buckle. Inside the palace, Catherine Parr nurses her husband like a nursemaid to a plague victim. She reads him scripture. She listens to his angry mutterings. She endures his oaths and his stink. She dreams, privately, of peace. Henry's final days unfold in physical torment, so profound it becomes theological. The leg wound ceases to close. His bowels fail. His body retains fluid until he swells grotesquely, his skin shiny and taut like stretched parchment. He can no longer lift his arms. He soils himself. The air around his bed is so foul that even his physicians begin to stagger. He screams in sleep. He curses people long dead. He speaks to Anne Boleyn, to Jane, to Catherine, his words slurred with agony. You are in the room. You are one of his chamber servants, hand-picked and gag-ordered. You stand in the shadows and watch as the King of England, the man once called Defender of the Faith, lies bathed in sweat and excrement. You hear him beg God not to forget him. You hear him weep, then rage, then whimper. He dies inch by inch. On the night of January 27th, 1547, the bleeding intensifies. He slips in and out of consciousness. His priests begin to chant, but he pushes them away. He does not want to hear Latin. He wants to hear the English Bible, the one he helped authorize read aloud, so that his own words, twisted through Scripture, might usher him into eternity. But no such clarity comes. His mind is cloudy, his mouth flecked with foam. His final word, according to one account, is monks. Another says he simply expired before anyone could anoint him properly. But the horror does not end there. The next morning, his body is wrapped in linen and placed in a sealed coffin. The ulcers have burst. The bodily gases build. On the journey to Windsor, the coffin begins to leak dark putrid fluid. In Sion Abbey, where the cortege stops overnight, the stink becomes unbearable. According to a legend recorded by John Stowe, a dog is found licking the leaking blood. To the superstitious, it is divine judgment. The death of Henry is not a peaceful release. It is a detonation of everything he built. The factions move quickly. The Seymour family asserts dominance. The Privy Council hides the king's death for days, terrified of immediate revolt. His will is tampered with, almost certainly. His image, carefully curated in life, is already being reshaped in death. What remains is a kingdom in confusion, its spiritual identity fractured, its social order fragile, its people weary. Yet the institution endures. The crown passes, the page turns, but the shadow remains. If we are to confront the true legacy of Henry's reign, we must look not at the throne, but at the wounds what bled, what festered, and what refused to heal even long after his body was buried. His death was not an end. It was a beginning of unravelling. Edward, his precious son, ascended to the throne at 9 years old. The boy had never known kindness as anything but conditional. Raised in cold halls by tutors and guards, he had been groomed to worship doctrine, not empathy. Within 6 years, he was dead. Tuberculosis ate through his lungs, leaving behind a child-shaped vacuum into which the nation collapsed. Mary, Henry's eldest daughter, took the throne next. You are Mary. You remember your mother's humiliation. You remember being declared a bastard, forced to sign away your own legitimacy. You remember being made to serve your half-sister as a maid in your own birthright court. And now, with the crown finally on your head, you believe that God has chosen you to restore what your father destroyed. You bring back the Latin Mass. You reinstate communion by mouth. You burn Protestants. You do not rule with mercy. You rule with fire. Heretics scream in Oxford squares as flames consume them. The wood is soaked in pitch. The air reeks of scorched cloth and hair. Nearly 300 people are executed under her reign. The people whisper, "Bloody Mary," behind their hands, but you believe you are saving souls. In her desperation to cleanse her father's legacy, she becomes its mirror. Then comes Elizabeth, born of the woman Henry beheaded, raised as an outcast, trained to survive. Elizabeth is not a queen of vengeance, but of calculation. Her strength lies in performance, in control. She never marries, never shares power, never allows a man to speak for her, but even she is haunted. She wears a powdered mask, a white, cracking face painted over trauma. She surrounds herself with advisors who remember her father's wrath. She builds a cult of virginity to disarm a court addicted to power through marriage. Under her, England rises, its navy strengthens, its arts blossom, but always beneath the surface, the scars remain. Because Henry's system never truly dies. It adapts. The divine right of kings becomes gospel. The royal household becomes bureaucracy. Parliament learns how to twist itself into pretzels of obedience. Future monarchs will wield his precedent like a sword and a shield. Centuries later, the system will still whisper his name. We must reckon with that. We must understand that Henry VIII was not merely a tyrant or a lover or a bloated, dying king. He was a system incarnate, violent, charismatic, paranoid, and devastating. A man whose personal flaws became national laws. A body whose decay mirrored the corrosion of every institution he touched. Even today, we still feel his shadow. Every time we debate the limits of executive power, every time we romanticize monarchs while forgetting the corpses behind the crown, every time a leader's whim rewrites law, suppresses dissent, or trades human dignity for legacy, we walk back into the palace. We step into that gilded chamber where truth is treason and silence is survival. The lesson of Henry VIII is not about kingship. It is about complicity. The silence of courtiers, the cheer of the crowd at executions, the physicians who lied, the priests who nodded, the wives who were replaced, the daughters erased. You are not just watching history, you are inside it. Because the question his reign leaves us with is not, how could this happen? The real question is, how often has it happened since? And how many of us, if we lived beneath that throne, would have bowed too? The ulcer may be gone, the crown buried, the body rotted. But the system he perfected, the one that demands obedience at the cost of truth, power without pain, and spectacle without soul, that system endures. We remember Henry not because he ruled. We remember him because we keep repeating him.